For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from Cape Town, South Africa. Good morning, Michael.
Morning. A bit of a change in consumer confidence in the United States has done a lot for the Far East markets. Hong Kong's up about 2%, the Nikkei up about 0.4%. So as we go into the Christmas holidays, as far as Western world is concerned, a slight note of optimism that's coming from the United States. China is also pledging to help its to support its real estate, its property businesses. It's going to start with bond purchase plans, credit support, and the People's Bank of China is going to support the industry as it goes through deals and restructuring. China will change after the pandemic, the sort of way in which it's headed for industry there. It's changing from its property increase and its property emphasis to digital and the green economy. Its exports to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that's ASEAN, are up as its demand from the United States falls, and experts expect it to bounce back. As far as the United States is concerned, the Dow was up 500 points yesterday on better than expected earnings, strong consumer confidence data as well. A little oversold was the feeling that the market might be right now. Jobless claims, obviously, we get today. I'll be talking about those with Reuters later on. But if you just look at the overall figures for the year, the Dow down 8.15%, the S&P down 18% on the year, and the Nasdaq down 31%. As far as tech's concerned, there's a new US bill to force Twitter, TikTok and the like to transparency. What they're supposed to be doing is sharing internal data. It's a bipartisan bill. It's called the Platform Accountability Transparency Act, and it'll show to independent and also researchers about the ad libraries and the sort of algorithms and the content moderation that exists on those particular platforms. FTX founders, top associates, Caroline Ellison and Gary Wang have as their boss, although their previous boss, Sam Bankman-Fried, flies back to the United States, to New York, to face operation. They've agreed to cooperate. They've both pled guilty to the various accusations, allegations, and so on. Wire, securities fraud, money laundering. Big prison sentences loom. Whether that'll happen, anyone's guess at the moment. As far as Elon Musk is concerned, he's been talking about the cost cuts in Twitter. He's saying, as we said yesterday, that it's approaching bankruptcy, and he's not making life very easy for whomever the successor is. $3 billion in negative cash flow at the moment. It's taking place in what he says is an emergency fire drill on our hands. That's how he's describing what's going on there. Revenue expected to be $3 billion in next year, but losses of $2 billion. So again, facing dire financial consequences. The EU scandal with Qatar has caused an ex-commissioner to be questioned, Dimitris Avramopoulos. He's being questioned about the Qatar scandal. Apparently, he accepted €60,000 from an organisation called Fight Impunity, which is founded by Pierre Panzeri, who himself is being investigated by the authorities, by the EC authorities, charged with corruption and money laundering. Again, these are just allegations, and both of these men are pleading innocent to both of them. To the UK, and the British Chambers of Commerce is saying that actually the good of Brexit is failing as far as bureaucracy is concerned. The balance of trade is not working in their favour at the moment, down about 7% is trade, and Britain is becoming more and more uncompetitive. However, the nurses, now here's some breaking news, I think. The nurses are saying negotiate or else to the government, and it looks as though the government might be softening their stance very, very slightly. Indeed, it looks as though there may be talks today, there may be talks after Christmas, there may be a postponed wage award, maybe as far ahead as August, possibly next year, but not at all sure about that. Oil has rallied on those good figures from the United States, and maybe Chinese demand picking up. OPEC saying that production will remain relatively tight, and the Bank of India finally is warning against private issues of cryptocurrencies. Its finance minister, Shakti Kanta Das, has been saying that the security and speculative private crypto should be banned. Unsurprisingly, he's saying this because it just so happens that the Bank of China is announcing a digital rupee, and Bitcoin miners have been going bust as well. So the fallout from ETX and cryptos is carrying on till the end of the year. Isn't to say things won't get better next year. That's the global view.
All right, real quickly, it looks as though there's going to be some concession in the horizon. But what dent will this have made on the public healthcare system in England, that was touted to be a solution to the suffering people of Britain after the Second World War, that the likes of William Beveridge advocated for in that famous thesis called the Five Giants? What dent will it bring? All of this process.
The ills of the NHS are nothing really. I mean, what we're seeing right at the moment are the wage demands, but the ills of the NHS go right back to those days you're talking about, basically, because the thing was not designed for the current population that we have now, which is one which is better, healthier than it was, but also getting older as well. And it seemed, the idea that service should be free on demand is something which I think is going to have to be revisited. And as I was suggesting the other day, it may have to be revisited by an apolitical committee, maybe businessmen in there, talking about delivery, not about how much money is pushed in, but what actually comes out. And I think that's the crucial thing as far as the NHS is concerned. So I've noticed this morning a certain kind of softening as far as the government's attitude towards the nurses is concerned. They have an enormous amount of public support, much more than the striking rail unions and the post office and the rest of them. And so I suspect that something probably will be done. But what I'm saying is I think there's a slight softening, but it does nothing at all to address what needs to be done with the National Health Service, which is a complete overhaul of the way it offers services to a population which has changed dramatically since the era you're talking about, which is 1948.
All right, thank you. Just still on that, I was going to ask, well, you touched on it just now, but if indeed Rishi Sunak and the UK government is softening on the nurses' strike, do you think that the other unions would see this as an opportunity to press on, saying that they also might come to the negotiation table, might being the operative word, with the UK government? So the Royal Mail, like you mentioned, you talked about the transport who've been striking even before the nurses, who've gone on strike even before the nurses, look at emergency services and the likes. And then over to Brexit. Some Brexiters have said that this isn't what we bargained for. Even those who voted yes are saying it's not what we envisioned. It's not what we asked for. It seems like the UK government wasn't prepared when they exited. In fact, someone has likened it to bringing out Christmas turkey 5 minutes before it's time for dinner, saying that the UK government wasn't at all ready. How will they begin to solve these bureaucracy issues around businesses for UK residents and citizens?
I would have expected this survey to come out from the British Chambers of Commerce, and I wouldn't have expected anything different. People are finding that exporting is slightly more difficult when they don't have an open door to knock at as they had with the EU. I think it'll take a few years. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying I think this is what's happening. What these companies are complaining about is having to fill in more forms and more bureaucracy. They're complaining about the red tape that they thought would miraculously disappear. Well, politicians are not necessarily prepared for the real world, and so that's why this was pushed through. And secondly, it's going to take quite a long time, I feel, for this to balance itself out. The fact of the matter is that exports are down about 7%. Now, they're not down 100%, they're not down 50%, they're down 7%, but they are down. And the British Chambers of Commerce, which tends to concentrate on smaller businesses, is actually saying that those that wish to export are finding life a little more difficult. I'm sure that they are, and I'm sure that probably things will settle down very, very slightly. I'd love to know what happens in 6 months' time, but you're right. I mean, the thing was rushed through, as most legislation is. Politicians do things for politicians' means, and although they say it's all done and it's all fixed, as we said it would be, the fact is that the devil is in the detail, as usual. The fact is, as far as the unions are concerned, well, I think that again, with politicians, what was happening here was that they saw that the nurses' strike was getting a lot of support from ordinary voters, and not just ordinary voters, but Conservative voters as well, and members of the Conservative Party. And I think this has probably pricked the government into doing something. So the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, is still blaming this on the unions, but I can see a slight softening, and it may be that he is going to, what you're seeing is politicians up against each other. He's saying, I'm going to ask the Prime Minister to see if we can do something about this, and we may see a breakthrough in the coming days. But so far, no negotiating table, and both sides digging in to their demands. Your question is a very good one. What will happen with the other unions? I think the other unions may well say, well, look, you've awarded this to the nurses. We demand the same. I suspect that the public may have something to say in this. We may see more opinion polls, not perhaps supporting the strike of the rail workers and the Royal Mail in the same way that they are clearly supporting the nurses right now.
Well, on Brexit, the British Chamber of Commerce is proposing 5 urgent recommendations to the government to modify the Trade and Cooperation Agreement of 2020. But the issue is, will government listen? Because government officials are insisting that that agreement is the best deal ever. The same government that is saying that negotiations with the unions will be postponed till next year, that the agreement will be reached by next year. By then, most people will be dead as a result of the strikes. But I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that businesses, the tech giants, they are relocating from London as headquarters. They are either shutting down their offices or they are converting offices to something else. And landlords, in England and Dublin are having issues with revenue and all of that. Well, is this, a transformation of the world of work, people working from home, or as a result of the fact that London doesn't look like a very attractive capital to some of these tech giants anymore, or it's simply a business decision as a result of doing profit, and also the stocks of these tech giants not doing so well. Then the other issue that I want you to comment on briefly, Goldman Sachs is saying that the Bank of Japan, having taken a decision to modify its COVID band, that will be an indication that Bank of Japan may subsequently increase interest rates and move from the current negative interest rate band of minus 0.1%. But the economists at the Bank of Japan are saying, no, the fundamentals did not change because they didn't change anything. They're keeping the same negative interest rate. But this is against orthodoxy, what you call orthodoxy, the pattern across the world. What is the motivation for Japan? Just stay with those negative interest rates.
I think the Bank of Japan is probably, it acted very, very softly, didn't it, the other day when it was talking about maybe lessening the yield on the 10-year bonds, which, it's immensely complicated, as most of these things are, and it's much more complicated than quantitative easing. But the long and the short of it is, what the Bank of Japan is trying to do is give the banks some support so that they're able to lend a little bit more and help the economy. What the Bank of Japan is absolutely, it appears at the moment, does not want to do is act any more aggressively than it's doing at the moment, because it knows what deflation actually looks like, and it's caught in a relatively sweet spot. I think it's feeling its way forward very gently. Goldman Sachs may well be right. Who am I to argue with them? But what I see from it is a central bank which is moving very, very cautiously indeed. That the thing about Japan is, of course, that it is one of those countries which depends an enormous amount on imports, and it's seen the yen strengthen very, very slightly. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, I'm not quite sure. But I'm sure that is more because equities did not respond very well to the fact that the Bank of Japan was moving very, very slightly. I didn't really understand that. I would have thought they would have acted quite well to something which is designed to stimulate the economy. As far as moving from London is concerned, there's no question that rents are too high, business rates are too high. And if I were a politician, I'd be looking at that, or at least if I were a business-led politician, I'd be looking at that. But I would caution that wherever these tech companies may well see themselves going, they are not going to escape the regulation that is heading their way, whether they relocate to the European Union, whether they relocate to the United States, or indeed to anywhere else in the world. They will find that the regulators are following them. And we've just take this morning about the way in which the United States is trying to regulate TikTok and regulate Instagram and so on. They want to have a look at their algorithms. They want to work out how they actually reach the conclusions that they do and whether they're actually guiding people in a fair way towards commercial content. So I feel as though the regulator will catch up with those tech companies wherever they are. But your central point, I think, is correct. I think London is getting too expensive.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. Thank you indeed. Now for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Udiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning to all our viewers. Yeah, we kick off with debt. A letter cited by, that was read out by the Senate President Ahmed Lawan to the Senate. We see that the President is seeking to restructure ways and means, which I think as of December is at 22.7 trillion. He's also seeking an additional 1 trillion naira. Now, you're looking at our total public debt now. If you add, this is from the Debt Management Office as at September, you add the 22 trillion from ways and means, you add the extra 1 trillion that the President's letter is seeking, and you add 67.7 trillion. If you look at our debt servicing, we already talked about our debt service for the first 9 months of the year. That's at 3 trillion, which is already up double digits, but that's based on existing debts. Now, what the President is seeking apparently is for the ways and means to be securitized, to be turned into 40-year bonds at 9% interest. Thought it was interesting that they think they can dictate what the interest rates would be on that, but so that's what they're pricing it at. He's also seeking, I believe, a 3-year moratorium, which was illegal.
Securitizing ways and means, you can't do it according to the CBN laws.
No, you can now, because you have to pay off the debt. The debt already exists. So what they're doing is a restructuring. It's pretty simple. I owe this amount of money, I need time.
I think you should go check back.
Yeah, so, how do you pay off the money then? What do you do?
They must find a way to pay it, but you can't securitize this debt. It is illegal.
Of course you can.
They tried it before. You remember the DOM tried doing it?
What?
And they raised an alarm on the securitization of this debt for over 20 years, and they raised an alarm on it, and they had to backtrack.
No. There was discussions on securitizing. Again, lawmakers are going to approve it. So the letter has been written to them to look. Debt has to be paid off, right? And this bulk of money has not been captured by the Debt Management Office. So when you add that ways and means, which, up until now we didn't have the figures, but now this letter sheds more light on it. It's 22 trillion naira as at December. So you got to pay it off. Now, if you don't have the revenues, we know about Nigeria's revenue struggles. You've got to restructure. Remember when Zainab Ahmed, the Minister of Finance, got into a bit of a kerfuffle because she used the word restructuring in a Bloomberg article and Bloomberg interview, and then she was pressed on it by Richard Quest at a forum, and then she kind of backtracked. And it's restructuring. That's what you do when you owe money. So you want to turn that into a 40-year bond, pay it over time, and hopefully pay it off. But that debt now falls on the head of whoever comes into office in 2023. So that's one. What else is going on? You all talked about the withdrawal limits. So this is what has changed now. Individuals now 500,000 a week. It was 100 before. Corporates is now 5 million. It was 500 before. And the tax 3%, 5% respectively if you go over that limit. Now, this is I find this disappointing that after only 2 weeks, this was turned around, because we shared the electronic payments data here for the first 9 months of this year, and it's up. So 272 trillion as far as instant payment service, mobile is up, POS is up, checks are down, e-bills up. We as far as the cashless path that Nigeria is walking, yes, it is to be acknowledged that we still are very much dependent on cash. And yes, Christmas is close, but there are point of sale setups across markets. You can transfer money. Yeah, I know there's network issues and so on and so forth, but this needed to be tested. And I think that the central bank has, caved into pressure from politicians and people who are running for elections, and that whole threat of the DSS and so on and so forth. This should have been tested. If you don't have access to cash, you can transfer money. There are point of sale. And also, the central bank, remember when Governor Mefele visited President Buhari in Daura, he made the point that they have 1.4 million agents across the country. Now, that's the central bank. The banks themselves also have agents across the country. So for the rural areas, if you don't have access to cash, you can meet with an agent and convert. And if you're going to go to, if you are planning on spending money ahead of Christmas, you know how much you're going to spend, yes? You can visit a bank, make a withdrawal if you want to make your purchases in cash, which I'm not sure why you would want to, or based on your planning, you have cash points at those particular markets. So wherever it is you want to make it spend. So the point is, the data shows that electronic payments are climbing, and this should not have been. I mean, going from 100,000 to 500,000, you can go from 100 to maybe 200 or 300. They caved in. Anyway, it's funny, yesterday we were talking about rail in Abidjan, and the Bruno Le Maire, the economic minister of France, coming to visit Côte d'Ivoire. Well, later on, Governor Sanwo-Olu inspected the Blue Rail line. This is phase 1. Apparently phase 1 has been completed. Now, if you remember, the Blue Rail is part of the Transportation Master Plan by the Lagos State government. Phase 1, now they broke it down into about 5 phases, which makes you think of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We just finished phase 1 there. And essentially phase 1 for the Blue Rail is a 27-kilometer infrastructure that is supposed to start from Marina and terminate at Kokomaiko. That's the full phase. Sorry, that's the full plan. Phase 1, what Governor Sanwo-Olu is from, I believe, Marina to Mile 2, which is 13 kilometers. So this is not a commissioning. This was just the governor inspecting the developments with rail. What else is going on? Fuel scarcity, since we're talking about rail, still persisting. We're only, 3 days to Christmas. NNPC said this would be over soon, and it's not. And
All
that's,
right. So, Rotus,
there you go.
Rotus, I'm going to read a provision from the CBN Act for you.
Read it.
38, as regards securitization.
Okay.
At first, it says, the total amount of such advances shall not at any exceed 5% of previous years. All advances made pursuant to the section shall be repaid. As soon as possible shall, in the event of repayable, the end of the federal government financial year in which the grant granted, if such advance remain unpaid at the end of the year, the power of the bank to grant such further advances in the subsequent year shall not be exercisable unless the outstanding advances have been repaid.
Okay.
In such a form, the bank might determine that no repayment shall take form of promissory notes, such as promise at the future dates, or securitization by the way of issuers of treasury bills, bonds, or the forms of security which require to be underwritten by the bank.
Okay, well, if that's the case,
that's
then,
what the CBN Act says, and that's what I'm saying. What the government is doing here, Rotus, it's illegal because the CBN Act states this.
Well, that's why you have a legislature, and that's why the lawmakers. Okay, so wait, so Rufai.
That's my argument.
Okay, so fine. Are you saying so the law doesn't make sense then, right?
What?
It doesn't make sense because how do you pay off the loan?
Yeah. So it is obvious that with this, the federal government is violating its own CBN Act.
Rufai, they already breached the act when they went above the 5% limit for the previous year's revenue.
Anyway,
I get you. Well done. Well, you're a research guy. Well done, but you have to pay off the debts. That's the thing.
One of the major
you have to pay
dilemmas of the Nigerian experience is how government, as government, and through its officials, are constantly breaking the law.
Yeah, exactly.
Even when persons swear to uphold the rule of law, they ignore it. Have we not talked about people not respecting court judgments? Have we not talked about the routine violation of the Procurement Act? However, with regard to this, we're talking about ways and means. In common man's language, that's when the CBN prints money for government to spend. And we have something like about 67 trillion when you add everything together, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what did we do with that 67 trillion naira?
Right.
Can you see the evidence
Yeah,
anywhere? And all of this, again, runs counter to all the recommendations that have been given. The World Bank Development Update, in fact, addresses the issue of waste and means and said that Nigeria has to move away from this over-reliance on waste and means, which will just increase your debt service to revenue ratio, and then makes no money available for capital critical spending.
Right.
Which is, in fact, one of the things brought up by the Minister of Finance when she was explaining the 2023 budget, that in fact there may not be enough money for capital projects in 2023. So you keep printing money, who is going to pay it back? If you say 40 years and all that, okay, by 40 years, most of the people who are in government now will have created a burden for people of the future. So these are the critical questions to ask. How about spending reform? Instead of just printing money and throwing money at it. We talk about inflation. Is this not part of it? Let's start about that. Second, the Lagos Metro Rail Line. I think it's a watershed moment for Lagos State. I think also it's a historic moment that the Sanwo-Olu administration has been able to provide evidence of progress on the Blue Rail Line. Only yesterday, as you pointed out, we were talking about Abidjan. This rail line, when completed, can take up to 500,000 passengers per day. Yeah. So this is the phase one that the governor is inaugurating. But we've been told that the commissioning will be within the first quarter of next year. And we hope that that happens. Why is it historic? In 1981, August 1981, under Governor Jakonde, as he then was, this idea of metro line was introduced. There was supposed to be counterpart funding. But in 1983, when the military government took over power, it was one of the first things that they cancelled. So it's good to see that it's been revived. The dream of Jakonde revived by Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu when he became governor. And now, years later, we have the Blue Rail Line. There's also the rail line, the Red Rail Line. So I think this should give a lot of hope and enthusiasm to Lagos residents, particularly in a city where moving from one part to the other is a nightmare, made worse in the last 4 or 5 days by fuel scarcity and the traffic jams at various junctions and the ineffectuality of LASMA. I see LASMA officials, instead of helping to clear traffic and assist, they've become spectators. I saw 3 of them this morning, just watching the situation. So the rail line will protect us from the inefficiency that we see on the roads, I hope.
Absolutely. Just to say congratulations to the Lagos State Governor. Definitely want to applaud. And also to mention the sensitivity of the environment. It's going to be powered by electricity with its own electric power plant. So important, but very important, like Doctor said, the 500,000 capacity would be achieved only after the completion of the rail line. Currently, this phase one would only be able to take 100,000 passengers. Okay. But kudos to the Lagos State government.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Really a major development. Thank you, Roger.